cercherò anzi di essere breve anche perché
I'll try to be short because you already heard a lot about the Drancy camp.
Convegno, anzi
And
la
so
professoressa Poznansky ha fatto proprio una lezione dedicata al campo, quindi non mi
you already heard a
soffermerò
lot. So Professor
sulla
Poznansky
vita
made a
del
lecture on
campo
that. So
come campo,
I
ma
won't
cercherò
dwell
di
on the
raccontarvi
camp life
la vicenda di questo complesso
per se,
architettonico
but
e
I'll
le
try
domande
to
che
tell
pone
you more
oggi.
about the
Questa è un'immagine
complex
catastale del
life of
1936
these
che
complex
mostra,
disease,
e ancora
a
meglio si vede
cadastre
in
map
quella
of
successiva,
1936,
dove
and
si colloca,
you
dove si
see where it
collocava
is located, where
questo
well
grande
it was
complesso che, come è
located,
stato
this
già
large
detto
building
precedentemente, è in
that
realtà un progetto
actually
architettonico
was an architectural project
modernista, pensato da un gruppo di architetti,
designed by a
Marcel
group
Lodz,
of
Jean Baudouin, con la collaborazione di Jean
architects,
Prouvé,
Large Boudin and Privé,
nuovo modo di abitare, un modo
and
di
it
abitare
was
più
designed
confortevole,
as
più
a
igienico, che va
new way of
vuole,
living, as a new
lasciare
residential
nel
solution.
passato la città
So
fitta, la città
a new way
insalubre, la
to
città caotica
sort of
del
conceive
passato.
living in a city, living
Nel
so the chaos and confusion
1925 il
behind. So
Dipartimento della Senna
1925,
acquisisce
the Sand
questo
Department
lotto in un'area
buys
rurale
up this plot of land
per
in a rural
realizzare
area to
degli
then
alloggi come abitazione a bon
create
marché,
dwellings as sort of low-cost housing, social housing.
Dove si colloca? Si colloca
So where is
nell'area
it
a nord-est
located?
di
Well,
Parigi, che come si
it
vede
is
da
in the
questa
northeast
immagine è ancora
part of Paris,
un'area molto
and it
poco
is an area
urbanizzata, o
that
comunque
was
urbanizzata con delle piccole
not
case
very
con
much
attorno
inhabited,
dei
with
campi. E
small
viene realizzato
houses
questo
all
complesso.
surrounded by
Un
fields.
complesso
And so
con
this
invece
huge
5
complex
torri
is set
multipiano
up with
che dovevano
5
avere la parte di
multi-story
alloggi
towers
un po' più
that should have had,
considerati
let's say, slightly sort of improved social housing flats.
che dovevano essere addirittura
And
1250
so
alloggi
initially,
all'interno di questi
1,250
edifici invece
flats had been
schiera,
planned
insomma,
inside
sotto alle
these
torri. Quelle che vedete alle spalle delle
buildings.
torri erano
And
le fabbriche
behind
all'interno delle
the
quali
towers,
si
you see the
lavoravano i pezzi
factories
prefabbricati per
where
costruire in un breve tempo
parts to be used for
grande
the
complesso
construction of
che poi
this
doveva
large
essere
complex
completato, in questa immagine
would
non
have
c'è
been
ancora,
made,
dalla famosa corte
and then
a
there
forma
should
di
have
U, che sarà
been
poi
the
quella che
U-shaped
diventerà
sort of
il
complex
campo,
that
mentre
would
al
be
posto
then turned
delle
into the
officine
camp,
dovevano
and
essere
the
costruiti
factory and
redonde,
workshops
una parte come di
would then have
cuspide,
been
insomma, dovevano andare a
replaced by
chiudere
other
la
facilities
parte a nord
supposed
del
to
complesso.
close the northern part of the
Come,
whole
non trovo la freccina.
development.
Come è già stato
So,
detto,
as it
questo
was
progetto
already
è
said,
stato
this
molto
project
studiato.
was
Venivano
carefully
architetti
designed,
da
and
altre nazioni per venire a
several
studiare questo
designers
cantiere.
and
Siamo più o meno all'inizio degli anni
architects
30,
joined
durante
the
la fase
group.
di
We are at the
cantiere.
beginning
Viene
of the
pubblicato su
30s.
importanti riviste di
Building
quel momento,
site has been just started,
spesso
and
celebrando appunto questo
technical
afflato,
press
che
of
era un
the
afflato
time talks
condiviso
about
da
this, and there is a lot of
molti,
enthusiasm and
a livello
excitement
sovranazionale dagli architetti
about
per appunto
this
un
project. So
abitare
everybody's looking at what is being
popolare
done with these
migliore.
improved
Esistono
social
anche
housing
una serie di
solutions,
cartoline che
and there are
mostrano
also
i primi
postcards
grattacieli
that
della
show the very
regione dell'area di
first
Parigi. E anche
skyscrapers
questo è un
in the Paris area.
abbastanza di
And
rottura,
again,
cioè
this
il
is a rather
grattacielo che,
disruptive
oltre
element. So
all'oceano, era un
these
luogo
towers
tutto
that somehow
lusso, invece
were the
qui
symbol
viene
of
definito
luxury
come
here
abitazione
would have
popolare. Sono
housed
anche molto belle
and
tutte queste
hosted
serie
social
di immagini
housing
fotografiche
flats. So
che ci
we have
mostrano
this
tutto
beautiful
sommato
collection
però
of pictures,
un'area vuota
well,
di
showing
cioè sono le
places that are
immagini
empty with
delle,
no man, no
delle riviste di
human
architettura,
presence. These are the
fotografie
typical
splendide,
pictures that
con
are
però
usually
la
made for
struttura.
architectural
Allora, in certi casi vengono
magazines.
mostrati anche
So
gli
where,
interni,
I
anche questo di
mean,
nuovo tutto
all the
funzionale,
details
tutto
are
perfetto, tutto
enhanced
pulito,
and perfectly
orientato agli
shown in order
appartamenti
to
nel modo
show
migliore
the
rispetto al
decoration,
passaggio del sole, alla
interiors, the
climatizzazione,
structure,
al
the
movimento
shape,
dell'aria
the air
all'interno
conditioning,
degli appartamenti,
the
appunto.
silhouette,
Però, in
everything.
realtà, il
But
progetto
actually,
non venne
well,
effettivamente
the project
compiuto e
was
realizzato.
not
Questo
actually
perché siamo tra i
fully
32 e i 35,
implemented.
si
So
fanno
we are
sentire
between
gli
32 and
effetti della crisi
35, so
economica,
the
perché
effects
il
of the
Dipartimento
economic
della
crisis
Senna non si
start
può
to be
permettere di
felt.
mettere sul mercato
The Sand
degli edifici
Department
che
cannot
degli appartamenti che poi
afford
rimarranno
sort of marketing
sfitti, e quindi decide di
flats
fare
that
un
would
accordo con il Ministero della Difesa
remain
e
empty. And so
all'interno della
there's an
struttura
agreement made with the
inviterà la
Ministry of
gendarmerie,
Defense,
le
and so
famiglie
the gendarmerie
degli
and
indagati,
some and the relatives
e
of the
sappiamo
a policeman would then inhabit in here and occupy these flats. But as we heard, in 1940, so the wide sort of yard would have been used as parking lot. Actually, it had been designed as a place to host shops and play areas for children, but actually it's used as a gendarmerie parking lot, and then later on it becomes a camp or POWs and then a transit camp, and according to the number of people that went through that, and considering also the staying times, we can consider them as a proper concentration camp. So, well, this is a picture gallery with further images of this complex. So here you see again other details, and you see the surrounding landscape. In the magazines, this complex had been praised, but there was already some criticism being expressed. Some found it as a cathedral in the desert, completely detached from the rest of the city. No town plan had been developed yet to connect it with the city. But then in 1942, on the other side of the pond, Louis Sert, an architect, considered this project within Can Our City Survive publication that, in line with the International Congress of Modern Architecture, was considering the best example of new habitat solutions for the First World War period. And again, this was a sort of precursor, a forerunner for complexes that would be built from 45 on, but especially in the 50s, 60s and 70s for sort of mass habitat solutions. Well, here we see finally some human faces, and actually now it is very crowded. 63,000 Jews will come to this camp and they will be deported. How they do inhabit these spaces? Well, actually the facility is a sort of ready-made structure made of different components, and we have staircases that connect the different parts, and we have basements, and while the staircases were also determining the blocks of the building. So we have some estranging pictures showing the internees that are inside a reinforced concrete modernist structure, being there waiting for time to pass. And these are some shots taken by the Red Cross. And this is specifically a gallery made by a certain Mr. Wagner, so made by the Germans. And this was considered to be for internal use, but it was considered to be something for internal use. These images dating back to December the 3rd, 1942. And the caption says that the Jews are here walking in the morning, having a walk, and actually these people were waiting to be taken somewhere else, to be sent somewhere else. Some of them, well, were working and were used to sort of select the objects being collected, and this is the extraordinary story told by Sebald in Austerlitz, and we have warehouses where the confiscated objects were stored. This is a picture right after the war, when the first commemoration takes place, and you see that the building is still empty, so it hasn't been completed yet. And as Chiara Beccatini showed us, well, memorial interventions are made later on, and in 1988 the wagon is positioned, but then in 76 these monuments had been built. and it was designed by Céline. So what was happening to the building between 47 and 48? Actually, it had been completed and it had been considered as a social housing. So for, let's say, deprived people. And then other memory interventions are made, and I won't dwell on that because you already heard about that. So maybe the only thing you didn't hear about is the tunnel, because at one point during some works in a close-by school, well, a tunnel that had been dug by the internees trying to escape has been discovered. And so they tried to escape by digging this tunnel. This tunnel that was then found so much later on. So these huge buildings are then seen as a new potential for the suburbs, and not only in France. And then in the 70s, these ideas started to weaken, and in 1976, the towers and some other buildings are demolished, and it would be replaced by similar but smaller buildings, but the large yard remains there. And these demolitions actually always struck the French, because, well, those buildings were torn down, but also the Veldiv, as well as other buildings, have been torn down. So this is a commemoration of the large roundup of 16 July 1942. So in the 50s, these Veldiv was quite inconvenient. It was sort of cold and with no very good visibility inside. So in 1958, it is torn down. This is a picture taken from a short documentary at the time that shows, the demolition works. And again, this is something that would happen, was decided in 58 or made in 59. So again, in France, we have several cases of sort of landmark buildings that have been torn down. So again, this was turned down, and that area would be filled with other buildings. So again, here you see where Drancy is located. This is a map of 36. Well, sorry, you saw the previous version of 36. This is of many years later, 70 or 82, and you see to what extent the urban fabric got thicker and thicker, and so now the distances are not so big any longer. Well, when you get to the original train, you get down and you take a bus to arrive there. And usually when I visit memorials, I also like to see exactly what is left on the spot, and also which is the route to be taken. And I must confess that it was, rather unexpected, because I was realizing that actually there are many sort of black people in here, many people from other sort of ethnic groups. And I almost was asked by a local person what I was doing there, because I was the only white person. And I didn't like to take pictures of the people that I have come across with. But at one point I asked myself many questions, because I also realized that very few people knew what I was looking for. When I asked the bus driver to let me off at the Cité de la Muette, well, he had never noticed that, and he says, well, this is my daily sort of stretch. So local residents have no idea. I took some pictures, and I didn't know that I was taking pictures of what had been some years before of a rather hot controversy. This is about the fittings, the hardware fittings, because, well, soundproofing and thermal insulation of the building posed a serious issue, because in the 30s things were made in a certain way, but then things got older over time. And so at one point the residents asked for the public administration to replace some parts, and so some fittings were replaced. But at one point there was a huge debate from a heritage and historic point of view, because, well, there was a reflection. Well, if you replace these fittings with the modern plastic fittings, we're going to change the identity of this place. And so in 2001, this place is listed as a historic monument because it was an architectural and a town project of major meaning for the 20th century. So the yard and the tunnel are considered and listed as architectural assets and not as historic assets. Some years before, Jean-Louis Cohen, a historian of architecture, had thought about this case and identified it as one of the most interesting cases of, let's say, change of use of a structure that had been conceived for one use but then was used for something else compared with the initial intention. So, and he used a French word, détournement, that indicates this. And then a heritage historian, another one, so went in greater depth. And actually, this change of use was not so innocent, because after the listing as historic, well, as architectural heritage asset, this sort of place is a pioneer of the worst huge social housing complexes of the 50s and 60s. And the U-shaped yard is the only trace of a concentration camp. Another art historian, a German one, Gabi Kemper, was struck by the coincidence between these two projects. So, and she writes, we are here in the most modern social housing city of the French 30s. We should think about that.
Cerco di stringare molto, c'è effettivamente un'altra questione che mi ha colpito molto, che è stata la facilità di trasformazione, ovvero, come abbiamo visto,
easy of change, because simply one side was closed and well, the watch towers were concentrated in key points. If we consider, so this place, I mean, it has no, let's say, special structure, and let's say that in the Enlightenment period, sorry, well, any kind of sort of watch facility had this kind of structure, and Buchenwald and Sachsenhausen had similar plans and layouts. And I found similarities with another facility that has a similar structure, and this was made by utopian architects active at the end of the 18th century, so long before the revolution, then tried to embody absolute power. These are the salt works in Sceaux, and that were designed as ideal city to sort of host the salt works all around, and with the crown layout for houses, and again with sun-oriented locations and so on and so forth. But well, the minimum part of that was built, used until the end of the 19th century, and then at the beginning of the 20th century, it was almost completely dismissed. And actually, it was relisted, but in the meantime, the war starts, and so it was used partially for several purposes. And between 41 and 43, it is going to be managed by the Vichy administration as an internment camp for gypsies. Well, clearly, Drancy and this place have been chosen for their location close to the railroad, and it was easy to close them and to control people inside. But still, there is something more subtle, I think, about the overlapping of some projects that actually maybe started for one purpose but then were used for another purpose, so moving from utopia to dystopia, so turning something that had been made for one purpose to something that was somehow misused. Roger Diener, the architect, designed this for the memorial that was opened in 2012. And somehow there is a sort of duplication effect of the building that was existing just next to the La Muette complex to facilitate also coded communication. And I must say that this positioning is quite striking because, again, this is something that provides a perfect vantage point and show said it, either it becomes a memorial monument or you should look at the people. And so this facility maybe is not that suitable today yet. And there, I mean, you see the tower behind that were the symbol of the radical change, the modernist architecture. So the yard is almost a relic of the original project. So I ask myself if this vantage point that is on top, so the memorial, observing the present, trying to question the past, is the best position to be taken, or if it would be much better to sort of try to establish a relation with the place, because, well, maybe it is too much detached. Maybe, I don't know, this is not the best position. Thank you.